During the 2020 election cycle, my video on why I wasn't voting for Joe Biden attracted plenty of controversy among friends, family, and acquaintances. I lost friendships over my decision not to vote for him. 2 years into his term, Joe Biden has surprised me with some progressive policy decisions he's made. But many of these policies seem largely symbolic in nature and do little to solve problems at their systemic sources. For example, he forgave $10,000 in student debt, but that's cold comfort for people who have a lot more debt than that, and a cold comfort for people who are still in college or about to enter it. And also, it's only for publicly held debt, too. And it does nothing to actually control the cost of higher education. It's quite clear that Biden is no ally to the working class or to marginalized people. However, my video on Joe Biden was not necessarily just about Joe Biden. It was more about electoral politics and the Democratic Party in general. In November 2022, many congressional offices, as well as state and local level offices, will be up for grabs. And the million-dollar question is, should we socialists vote in these elections? Here's what I have to say on the issue, and this may vary a little from the answer I presented in my Joe Biden video. It is a good idea to go to the polls to vote on local and state-level ballot initiatives. These initiatives are often the result of hard work of socialist organizers and working-class movements, and they directly affect the policy that you are forced to live under. Seattle recently passed an initiative to make Seattle a sanctuary city to protect abortion providers and abortion patients from prosecution. When it comes to voting for candidates, while the often heard refrain is vote blue no matter who, I say vote if you want to. I don't think there's necessarily any harm in voting for Democratic candidates, but don't pretend that your vote is actually accomplishing anything important. That Democratic candidate, if elected, is unlikely to do anything to actually advance the interests of working class people, even if they claim to be progressive. They are also unlikely to do anything to protect the working class from right-wing attacks. And on top of that, they're likely to support some vile right-wing policies as well, such as imperialist wars, increased funding for the police and military, and even austerity policies that punish the working class for their poverty. But Ghost, what about the far right? Voting for Democrats is our only hope to stop them. Now, it is true many of the people on the Republican ticket this year are horrific reactionaries who no doubt are dangerous to society and who should not be in power. The right-wing establishment has initiated unfortunately successful attacks on basic rights like protections for LGBT people, the right of teachers to discuss basic social studies with their students in an honest way, and abortion rights. Now, many people I talk to think that the solution to this is to support the Democrats. See, if we elect Democrats instead of these far-right asswipes, problem solved. But here's the thing. The Democratic Party is actually one of the reasons why these far-right candidates are getting such traction in the first place. The Democratic Party, or at least many members of it, I shit you not, have funded far-right candidates in Republican primary elections. This isn't just some wacky left-wing conspiracy theory. Many different media outlets, including left-wing outlets like Jacobin, right-wing outlets like Fox News and the Daily Wire, and centrist outlets like the Washington Post or NPR, have reported on this. The people who claim to be here to save us from the far right are the very people giving the far right their strength. The Democrats' logic in this situation is that crazy far-right candidates will be easier for liberal candidates to beat, Since these far-right candidates will largely be unappealing to the average voter, and since this will scare the Democrats' usual base of support and motivate them to go to the polls. The problem is, in an era of capitalist crisis, when standards of living are dropping, the middle class is becoming proletarianized, and working class people can clearly see that mainstream politicians have no answers to these problems, candidates among the far left and the far right can be much more attractive to the working class than moderates of any stripe. If you pair a far-right extremist who promises to buck the status quo, shake things up, and is at least willing to pay lip service to material issues that the working class faces, up against a moderate liberal who promises nothing and delivers nothing, a lot of workers, especially white workers who make up the majority of the US working class, are gonna go with the far-right guy. This is why Trump beat Hillary Clinton in 2016. In these times of crisis, workers are also particularly vulnerable to racist and bigoted manipulation, as they're desperate to find someone to blame for their problems. And without strong left-wing leadership among the working class to actually educate people on the true source of the problem, a lot of these workers will feel they have no choice but to turn to the right. Leon Trotsky talks about this a little bit in his pamphlet, Fascism, What It Is and How to Fight It. And while mainstream Democrats are willing to actually fund the far right, they do anything in their power to smash the left wing of their own party. We've observed over and over how progressive candidates are bullied out of Democratic primaries, and how, if elected, progressive politicians are bullied into shifting rightward to match their moderate Democrat peers. The Democratic Party is a bourgeois party that is actively working to push politics in America rightward. They are actively working against the interests of the working class and marginalized people, despite sometimes throwing us bones in the form of half-assed symbolic progressive gestures. The Democratic Party is not worthy of our support. Since they receive corporate funding, they are not capable of being reformed into an entity that can fight for the working class, and they will not protect us from right-wing attacks. Around the time that the Supreme Court, overturned Roe v. Wade, the Democrats, who control both houses of Congress and the presidency, had the opportunity to codify the right to abortion into federal law. While this bill was put forward, it did not pass. Democrats often bitch and moan about the Republicans blocking them when they fail to pass progressive legislation, but this time they really didn't have any excuses. Well, the Democratic candidates aren't perfect, but you're never going to get a perfect candidate, Ghost. You'll slow yourself down if you get caught up in purity politics. Ugh. Jesus H. Christ. I don't expect perfection from the politicians I support. I don't expect purity, but, I at the very least expect them to make a goddamn fucking effort to advance the interests of the working class. If you're telling me not to vote for Democrats, you are obviously just an operative trying to help the Republicans win. You're probably just a Russian bot. Duh. You have caught me. The reason I have Lenin and Trotsky on my wall is because I am Russian. And as you all know, only Russian people have heard of those assholes. The reason I have hammer and sickle everywhere is because I am right-winger, who thinks Nikolai Romanov did nothing wrong. And the reason I draw myself with giant teeth is because I am said I am robot, with no sensuous human flesh to bring boys to yard. Also, Russian accent is like one of only 4 accents I can kind of do. Which is why I grew up to work as Russian bot for glorious leader Vladimir Putin, who I adore because I am right-winger, instead of as voice actor. Oh my god, my mouth hurts. Jesus Christ, who the fuck do I think I am? Mark Hamill? Ugh, I need some peppermint tea. But Ghost, what about harm reduction? What about the lesser evil? Well, the harm reduction argument would make sense if the Democrats prove themselves willing to reduce harm. The term harm reduction comes from public health programs that provide temporary band-aid solutions to deeper problems. For example, setting up safe injection sites and needle exchange programs for IV drug users. This certainly is not an alternative to actual addiction treatment, but since addiction treatment programs are often unavailable or super expensive and are often ineffective and not evidence-based, these harm reduction programs are the next best thing. Voting for liberal politicians is not the same thing as, say, giving clean needles to IV drug users, because one of those things actually works and the other doesn't. Needle exchange programs actually work in reducing harm. They actually keep people alive long enough to get treatment for their addiction, and they actively reduce the incidence of blood-borne illnesses in the population. Voting for Democrats as a form of harm reduction, not so much. I've explained how Democrats are unable and frankly unwilling to protect the working class and marginalized people from right-wing attacks, and sometimes even join in on the carnage. If you want to claim harm reduction, you have to show that an action will actually reduce harm. The other problem with the strategy of harm reduction and choosing the lesser evil is that when you do that, you operate under the assumption that we have to pick one option or the other. Yes, if you are going to the polls, you almost never have a viable third-party candidate to choose instead of the Republicans or Democrats. But those who are obsessed with harm reduction are thinking too small and too short-term. There are many ways to be politically effective besides supporting one of the major candidates, and there are many ways to be politically active besides voting. But if we don't vote, what's left? Complete nihilism? Giving up and spending the rest of my life doing nothing but watching cat videos on the internet? Becoming a terrorist? Instead of trusting in politicians to make things better, we, the working class, need to start trusting in ourselves. Whether or not progressive legislation is passed doesn't depend so much on who is in office, but on how active, organized, and militant the working class is at any given point in time. So what does that look like? Well, first of all, it means organizing the working class into actual organizations. We know that the working class is on the move when we see large levels of recruitment into labor unions, as well as leftist and revolutionary organizations and parties. These organizations coordinate their members and mobilize them to collective action. You can't organize a strike, a protest, or direct action without at the very least getting everybody on the same email list. It's also important to note that even if the working class is angry and mobilized, that does not mean it's going to succeed in accomplishing its goals. Working class movements tend to fizzle and die unless a revolutionary organization steps up to the plate to articulate a clear set of bold and concrete demands, to lend expertise on what tactics do and do not work, and to educate their fellow workers on the real causes of their problems. This is why left-wing organizations are so important. It's not enough simply to get everyone out on the street. They have to know what they're doing when they get there. Secondly, mobilizing the working class means taking collective actions that actively challenge the authority of the ruling class, actively threaten the ruling class's ability to make a profit, threaten their sense of control and security. The most effective way to do this is a strike, preferably a general strike, which affects many businesses in an area. Nothing makes the ruling class panic more than cutting them off from their source of income. Strikes also demonstrate the workers do in fact have the ability to seize the means of production. And no, everyone just picking a day to not show up at work is not a strike. Strikes have picket lines, they have strike funds, they have a clear set of demands, and they actively find ways to disrupt the business in question besides simply withdrawing their labor. Street protests are slightly less effective, but they are still threatening to the ruling class. There are few things more terrifying than an angry mob. These protests can be especially intimidating to the ruling class if they actively disrupt business as usual. For example, by occupying certain facilities or businesses, or by blocking traffic. Unfortunately, whenever the working class discovers a tactic of resistance that works, the first thing the bourgeoisie do is make that tactic illegal. There is a long list of laws controlling what workers can and cannot do on strikes. Solidarity strikes are illegal. Manning picket lines in certain ways or doing certain things on a picket line is illegal. The law is often used to harm and intimidate protesters as well. Lots of anti-protest laws were put forward in the wake of the George Floyd movement that allowed the police to arrest and prosecute anyone accused of rioting. What's a riot, you ask? Well, it's any form of protest that the police don't like. Another tactic that the ruling class uses is cities instituting curfews, which allow the police to brutalize and attack protesters during certain hours of the day. Following the letter of the law can help you and your comrades avoid risk, and sometimes win the respect of your fellow working class people. But you have to understand that when you actively challenge the authority of the bourgeoisie, you are unlikely to win by playing by their rules. The bourgeoisie will never fight fair against us, so why should we be concerned about fighting fair against them? One perfectly legal and effective way that a working class or revolutionary organization can make a difference is by bringing forth ballot initiatives that directly affect government policies and laws. This requires collecting signatures on petitions and submitting these proposals to the appropriate authorities in the appropriate way. Of course, you should still expect hard resistance from the ruling class establishment during this process. And you should use boots-on-the-ground movement-building strategies and organizing techniques that connect with working-class people directly in person, such as, for example, public outreach tables. But of course, this work is hard. It's hard. I'm sorry, but it is. It requires regular, ongoing commitments of your time and energy. Often several hours a week, depending on what role you personally play in your working class/revolutionary organization. It's not like taking a Tuesday afternoon to drive to a church or school gymnasium to tick off a few boxes on a piece of paper and then drive home with a sticker on your chest feeling good about yourself. And yes, I recognize that in many places, for many people, voting is not easy. It can be hard to take time off work. Some areas have a bad ratio of voters to polling locations, which forces people to stand in line for long hours. But if you live under those circumstances, that's even more of a reason to think very carefully about how you want to spend your time and energy when it comes to political work. So, Ghost, are you saying that all electoral politics are bad and pointless? Definitely not. Like I said, the process of petitions turning into ballot initiatives is one effective tactic that working class organizations can use to actually directly affect policy. I personally think it's very prudent for working class people to vote on these initiatives. Also, running left-wing political candidates isn't a bad idea either, but working class and revolutionary organizations should think twice about running their candidates on a Democratic ticket, since the Democrats will go all out to shove a progressive candidate off their ticket in the primaries. Contrary to popular belief, third-party candidates can actually do pretty well in state and local elections. In 2014, Socialist Alternative, a Trotskyist political party, which at the time was called the Committee for a Workers' International, put forward Kshama Sawant as a candidate for city council in Seattle. She ran not as a Republican or a Democrat, but as a Socialist Alternative member. Not only did she win that election, but she has won re-election multiple times and has even beaten an attempt to recall her. But Socialist Alternative / CWI didn't just concentrate on traditional electoral politics during these campaigns. They used movement-building tactics and active public outreach to campaign for Sawant, with a big emphasis on their members standing on the streets and directly talking to working-class voters. And they didn't just send Sawant to the city council and wait around for her to vote progressively on council issues. Sawant uses her seat for, once again, movement building. She uses her public platform to speak to working class people directly, encouraging them to mobilize instead of trying to compromise with her liberal and conservative establishment peers in office. Because of this movement building, Seattle was one of the first cities to pass a $15 minimum wage. They passed an enormous tax on Amazon, and now, as I have mentioned before, Seattle is a sanctuary city for abortion providers and patients. Electoral politics are all fine and dandy, but at the end of the day, it's the working class who gets progressive policy passed, not politicians. Another thing to remember is that even if your socialist or progressive candidate doesn't win the election, they can still use the political campaign as tools for organizing and putting forward left-wing ideas. Bernie Sanders, while far from an actual revolutionary, was still progressive enough that the Democrats did everything in their power to shove him off the ticket in 2016 and 2020. But even though he didn't win, his campaign mobilized and inspired millions of workers and youth throughout the country. Overnight, the term socialism was completely destigmatized, with many young people now openly identifying as socialists, breaking through decades of Cold War reactionary propaganda. But again, a candidate with a campaign can only do so much. At the end of the day, none of this will pay off unless the newly inspired working class mobilizes and organizes. So, should you vote in the midterms? Once again, I think it's a good idea to research if any important initiatives are on your local ballots and vote on those. But if you are only going to the polls to fill government seats with Democratic politicians, you can do that if you want. But don't walk away from the polling booth thinking that you've actually accomplished anything meaningful. You certainly are in no way obligated to vote for Democrats. Under no circumstances should you choose voting over genuine organizing work. Don't skip your organization's branch meeting to go vote. If you could spend that Tuesday afternoon writing an article for your party newspaper or helping your organization with administrative work, choose that over voting. If on election day, all of your comrades are out selling newspapers, intervening in a protest, or running an outreach table, you will accomplish a lot more in the long term if you choose to spend your time helping them. Under absolutely no circumstances should working class and revolutionary organizations spend precious time and resources volunteering for Democratic campaigns or donating to Democratic candidates unless that candidate is a member of their own organization, in which case I would strongly encourage that organization to run their member as a socialist independent. If your organization wants to endorse a Democratic candidate, they should use the absolutely highest level of discretion when making that decision. They need to endorse candidates that will actually fight for the working class, and not whichever one they see as the lesser evil. Some baby leftists will try to emotionally manipulate you the way Democratic Party propaganda has emotionally manipulated them. If you don't vote for Democratic politicians, you obviously don't care about poor and marginalized people. But if you hear this from people, I encourage you to call them out on their bullshit. Point out their hypocrisy. If it's so important to you that we protect working class and marginalized people, why aren't you out there getting shit done? Why are you wasting time arguing with me about why I should support people who obviously do not give a damn about the poor and the marginalized, when you could be doing actual effective political work? What have you done today to help organize the working class? How much do you pay in dues each month to your union, your socialist organization, your revolutionary party? When was the last time you showed up to a protest, a rally, or a picket line? Hell, when was the last time you attended a regular branch meeting? What work have you done to help your organization grow, raise funds, recruit membership? How can you claim that I don't care about the poor and the marginalized when the only thing you have ever done is vote for agents of the ruling class? Put your money, your time, your effort, and your labor where your mouth is. Of course, the truth is not everyone can be an activist, and not every working class person needs to be an activist. Not everyone has the time or energy for such work, especially if you're working multiple jobs, raising children, or don't have access to good transportation or internet access. But I do think everyone is capable of contributing at least something, even if it's small. And if you can't help out right now with genuine organizing work, please try to appreciate the importance of this work. And please understand who your true friends and enemies are, because the Democrats are not your friends. Listen to me. The reason why I am going so hard, video after video, shitting on the Democrats is not because I think the Republicans are better. It's not because I think voting is completely and totally stupid. It's because I desperately am trying to encourage you to expand your political imagination. We have been trained growing up that we have no choice but to accept what the establishment presents to us. We are taught to think that the only alternative to politics as usual is either nihilism or terrorism. I am on my knees, my rusty, squeaky, Russian robot metallic knees, begging you to please organize. Get active. Stop accepting excuses from bourgeois politicians. Stop placing hope in bourgeois politicians to solve the problem that these very same politicians created. Because the only one who can solve these problems is the working class. And the only permanent solution is for the working class to take control of society completely. For various reasons, I've decided not to reveal which organization I belong to, since I don't want the pressure of having to represent the organization with every video I post, and in order to protect my own privacy. But if you message me privately, I can tell you about my experiences doing socialist activism. I can help you get in touch with experienced comrades in your region. And if you decide that my particular organization isn't your cup of tea, I can help you research what your options are. Message me on Facebook or shoot me an email. Though FYI, I check Facebook a lot more often, so that's probably your better bet. Oh, also I have a Patreon. Thank you for listening.